What's going on, guys? Welcome back to WWE Network and Show, where I, Graham Jason Matthews, break down all the original content I watch on the WWE Network. Today we're talking the latest episode of Broken Skull Sessions with Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Big Show. This is the fourth episode of Broken Skull Sessions since November, and it seems like they're kind of keeping it to a monthly basis, which is cool. The first one with Taker aired after Survivor Series. The one with Goldberg aired after TLC in December. The one with Kane, they did not wait until the Rumble for that one. They put that one up, I think, right after TakeOver, the UK TakeOver Blackpool 2 show aired in mid-January, and this one went up today on the VOD, the video on demand library, whatever. So there was no actual premiere date like they usually do with the Chronicles and the Day ofs and the 24s and with this show that you have done in the past. But I guess they just thought it was easier because there was no time to really air it after anything because there was no events this weekend, which is a good thing. I like that. It feels like every weekend we have some sort of wrestling show going on. This is the first weekend, it seems like in a while, where there's nothing going on for the most part. So I like that. It allowed me to watch it earlier on today and allowed me to talk about it here today too, and as opposed to waiting until tomorrow. But it is another long one. It does clock in at around an hour and 20 minutes, an hour and 24 minutes. So it is a long one, and it is worthwhile, though. It's the Big Show. I mean, he has a lot to talk about. Everyone that Stone Cold has had on so far has a lot to say because they're all legends from that Attitude Era. Taker, Kane, Goldberg, and now the Big Show. And I think he did a podcast, if I'm not mistaken, with Big Show. Maybe on his Steve Austin, podcast years ago. But I feel like he did one of his Steve Austin podcasts, the Stone Cold podcast, whatever, on the network, like 4 or 5 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. I feel like they already did a podcast like this. I'd have to go back. I mean, I've already seen it, but I would have to go back and rewatch and kind of see what they talked about there that they didn't talk about here and vice versa. But I thought for what this was, it was really, really good. And I've never really been the biggest Big Show fan. I think that's well, documented. But I thought this was great, very informative. And the hour and 20 minutes just flies by. The first thing that we learned when we kick off this podcast is that I guess there's a handshake called the Workers' Handshake in wrestling in WWE, where instead of doing a formal handshake, they would shake your finger. I guess a lot of people used to do that. Big Show was never really fond of it unless Mean Gene did it to him. He thought it was funny when he did it. Everyone else, not so much. But he talks about how he hasn't been in Los Angeles, where the show is filmed, since November. I don't know if he's currently... I think they already wrapped up season 1 production on the Big Show for Netflix, which they talk about at the end of this episode. I'm not sure... I'm pretty sure it's already done filming, and I don't know when it's going to air. I forgot about that. He didn't mention the air date, but this is the first time he's been in LA since then. And Austin was wondering, hey, why haven't you texted me to hang out and catch up and whatnot? And Big Show's like, well, I knew I was going to have the whole day with you here, so I was going to wait until today to talk to you. So anyway, while he was out in LA, he hung out with Joe Manganiello, and if you don't recognize the name, if you saw him, you would definitely recognize him. He's actually been on Raw before about 5-6 years ago. I feel like he was in a segment with Arnold and The Miz or something like that. And again, if you saw him, you would know exactly who I'm talking about. He was in Baby Driver a few years ago. So anyway, I guess he was hanging out with them while he was in LA. And we also found out here, this has also kind of been known now for a while, that Big Show has actually wrestled in 4 different decades. Not many people can say that. Having wrestled in the 90s, 2000s, 2010s, and having returned to Raw a couple weeks ago, he has now officially wrestled in 4 different decades. I think he came back on that first Raw of 2020, if I'm not mistaken. He said he actually got the call to come back on the Friday night before that Raw, to come back for Monday from Vince himself. And they went back and forth. It was 12:02, right before he was about to go to bed. Vince, being the madman that he is, texted him on Friday night saying, hey, can you go Monday? And he said, what for and where am I going? He said, X, Y, and Z, you're flying here, and you're going to be doing this. And he said, well, is it a tag team match, or is it a singles match? What is it? And he said, tag team match. He's like, all right, I'm in. I'm doing it. And so he came back to Raw, did the 6-man tag team match. I think he teamed with Kevin Owens and Samoa Joe against Seth Rollins and AOP. And he talked about how he was a little nervous going into it because he hadn't taken any bumps in over a year, almost 2 years. And he had to take a pretty big bump from AOP during that 6-man tag team match that fist fight or whatever they did on Raw, where they put up Big Show on their shoulders and they just slammed him down in the middle of the ring. So he had to take that bump, and he was a little bit worried about it because he hasn't taken a bump in a while, and you can see him visibly when they showed the shot of it here. He was really, really nervous, and he was worrying about it all day long, and he was relieved when he finally took the bump, because not that he didn't feel anything, but his body knows the drill after wrestling for so long. His body is used to it. He's like, oh, that wasn't a big deal. Like, I've been doing this for 20 years. Why am I freaking out about this? It was one of those type of things. But then we transition into his upbringing, what got him into wrestling. Not really his childhood, so to speak, but he did grow up in South Carolina. The two people that he looked up to in wrestling were Ric Flair and Arn Anderson. And he shares his story about seeing Arn Anderson in town before a wrestling show that night, which I don't think he ended up going to. He saw Andre the Giant in Honeycomb commercials, and he told his mom, listen, I got to change cereal from whatever I'm eating now to Honeycomb because I want to be big like Andre. And I guess it worked because he ended up being pretty big like Andre. But he always felt like he never really worked like Andre in the ring. He was a very different athlete. He was a much better athlete than Andre, let's put it that way. Andre is a larger-than-life superstar, but he was never nearly as athletic as Big Show was, who played basketball in high school, and I'm not sure if he went to college, but I know he played basketball at one point. And then he was introduced as Andre's son in WCW when he arrived there in the mid-90s, and it had its pros and cons. Being tied to Andre right from the get-go of his career gave him a lot of notoriety and attention, which is great. But at the same time, that we felt bad when fans would come up to him and be like, "Oh, I loved watching your dad work, and I was a really big fan of his. He had such an impact on my life." And it was nice that Andre had that impact on them, but he felt bad lying to them that he was, Andre's son, which in reality, obviously, he was not. And he said that's something he still gets to this day. He'll be like down south or something like that, and people will come up to him saying, "Hey, I used to love your father. Like, I'm such a big fan, blah, blah, blah." And like, they still don't get it to this day because they don't get, what that wrestling is scripted, brother, like all this other stuff. So I thought that was interesting. He talked about his debut match at WCW Halloween Havoc 1995 with Hulk Hogan and how he was really, really green at the time. And it was one of those things where you could see the footage when they rewatched the match where Big Show did not know what to do next. He cringes watching it now because he was so goddamn green at that point. The Yeti, Ryan Reese, I think his name was, or something along those lines. He debuted as the Yeti, I think, on that show, too. He was also really, really green. And nothing in that match that Big Show did blew him up. Right before that spot, when they did that spot where Yeti was, hugging Big Show to, suffocate Hogan. I don't know if it blew Big Show up or Hogan up specifically, but he was like, all right, you got to stop doing that. I think Lex Luger said something in the ring. He was like, all right, you got to stop that move. But they talk about his athleticism and how, early on in his career, despite being a giant, he always bumped the wrong way because he would do stuff for a reaction. And I feel like I've heard that before with people that are in the business today that do a lot of high spots and just to get a reaction. And it's obviously a lot harder now to get a reaction than it was 20 years ago. But nowadays, I feel like, I'm not a wrestler, so I can't really say with full certainty. But I feel like a lot of people today just do stuff to get a reaction, which, you want to get a reaction, but you don't want to hurt your character. And, you got to do what's right for the show, what's right for the match, what's right for you as a character, as a wrestler. If you do all these big moves and big spots all the time, you're really shortening your shelf life that way. And he talks about that here. He admits outright that he should have been smarter with how he worked and how that hurt him ultimately when he got to WWE. Because when he was in WCW, we actually said that he was very disillusioned because he worked with all the top guys when he was there, Hulk Hogan, Randy Savage, everybody. And he was very, very young. I think he was still in his 20s at that point. So he was super young when he got to WCW. He was beating a lot of these people. I think he won the world title in his debut match. And no one was really telling him, hey, work like a giant, slow it down, less is more, blah, blah, blah. Aside from Randy Savage. He said Randy Savage was one of the few people then that was telling him, hey, less is more, try to slow down a little bit. And even if people did tell him, he was still young enough where he wasn't really listening to what everyone was telling him. He kind of ignored their advice and whatnot. So that really did him in when he got to WWE, which was a completely different giant, no pun intended. And he realized at one point, kind of in retrospect, Stone Cold brings this up too, how the yelling in his matches became too much, like a giant, like, oh, look at me, I'm an ape, like, look at me, I'm a monster, I'm a giant, look at me, rah. And he realizes in retrospect how dumb that was and how it takes away from the match. But he does praise working with Ric Flair. I think it might have been Ric Flair's idea for him to do that, because it allowed him to sell in their matches. So we also talked about how, and Ric Flair, I guess, was his hero too, again, like growing up. So he was a mark working with him and how easy it was to work with one of the greatest of all time. So they talk about the NWO. He loves the NWO. He loves Hogan, Hall, Nash, whatever. But he didn't like how they never gave him the opportunity to give them their comeuppance. They beat him, and then instead of returning the favor, they just put him in the NWO. And it gave them a big guy, and, he got popular in the NWO. Not that he wasn't popular pre-NWO, but that happened with a lot of guys, where they always got one over on everyone else, and those same people were never able to get one over on the NWO. He didn't really like that about the NWO. He kind of felt like that was the time where he was ready to leave and go elsewhere, was when the NWO kind of took over, and everyone was in the NWO. The entire roster was on the NWO, saying Sting, when he talks about Sting, who was a consummate gentleman, he said. And he said that he was very sad for the business when WCW went away. Because, he was gone from WCW years earlier in 99, late 98. So he wasn't there when it went down. But he was sad because, it's one less place for people to work. It's one less place where people can make money. And now there's one less big company in town. Now it's really just WWE until TNA came along, Ring of Honor. But none of those companies ever ended up becoming what WCW was at its peak in the 90s. So from there, he talks about how, I already talked about the money thing and whatever. He said that he knew he had to leave when the NWO got popular. I already talked about that. He said that no one was really benefiting from anything in WCW at that point except for the NWO. They were cool heels and whatnot, and people loved them. But that was it. It was not benefiting the baby faces for sure. If anything, it buried the baby faces because they would do something either impressive or intimidating, whatever, and the NWO would just no-sell it. So no one got over, and the fans only drank the Kool-Aid of the NWO. So the entire roster in comparison looked like losers. And he was like, all right, I got to get out of here. I can't really deal with this anymore, blah, blah, blah. So he actually originally tried to get a job in WWE years earlier, pre-WCW. He talked to a guy named Bob Collins, so I guess he met him at an autograph signing for Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart, I think Bam Bam Bigelow was there, maybe one other person. And he said, he had this long trench coat, he had the long hair at the time, he was a fucking 7-foot giant, and he was thinking, maybe if I go up to this guy who works there, I can ask for a job, because it's, this is pre-internet, it's not like now where you can email people or send your tapes or whatever, not tapes, but like a YouTube link or whatever, DM people on social media. This is well before all of that. So what he had to do was go to this autograph signing, try to get noticed. And he did by the kids. The kids were like, oh, who are you? And he's like, oh, I'm nobody because I'm not a wrestler yet. I'm trying to be one, though. And he went up to this guy named Bob Collins, and he told Bob, hey, I have no experience. Because he asked him, oh, how much experience do you have in wrestling? And he said, oh, I have none. And he's like, oh, well, we have nothing for you, sorry. So there's one of those type of things. And he wasn't a dick for doing that because, again, despite the fact he was a giant, he had no experience. So why the hell would he hire him, And he said that Bob later apologized when Big Show got to WWE all those years later. I don't know if he still works there now, if he's even still alive, but he said he apologized to him all those years later because they were looking for people with experience, and Big Show was not that person. So Big Show did train at the Wrestle Factory in New Jersey, he said. Talks about Eric Bischoff said that he saw potential in him, that Bischoff saw potential in Big Show. But he was one of those type of people, at least at that point in his career, where he was very easily influenced. So he was always influenced by the NWO and Hogan, Nash, all those other guys. So he never really got his just due. Big Show did in WCW, which is why it didn't really work out when he was there in the 90s, at least later on. So they look back at his WWE debut at St. Valentine's Day Massacre back in February, on Valentine's Day actually, in 1999. So it was almost exactly 21 years ago. It's February 23rd as I record this. This was 21 years ago from last Friday. How crazy is that? I wasn't around at that time. I wasn't watching wrestling at that time. But yeah, he's been in the company now for over 20 years, joining Triple H in that category, Kane, Taker, very few people can say they've lasted that long in one company without ever having to leave and come back. He's one of those people. That's pretty crazy. Vince even told him outright, listen, I want to do you and Stone Cold Steve Austin at next year's WrestleMania. At WrestleMania, what would that have been, 2016, whatever? And I guess Big Show is trying to show Vince that he was a good businessman, even though he wasn't. So Vince saw that he wasn't going to stick up for himself. He wasn't going to stand up for himself. He wasn't, maybe he was too nice, too much of a pushover. I don't know. But Vince saw that he wasn't aggressive enough. So that match never happened. Stone Cold beat him well before WrestleMania. Big Show didn't go undefeated for 6 months like most monsters do nowadays in WWE. He was beat pretty quickly. And I think he was at WrestleMania, but he lost to Mankind via fucking DQ or some dumb shit like that. So that was it for Big Show, at least early on. And he also had a lot of heat. A lot of the top guys were not talking to him because they saw that he was a big guy and he was new. He was the hot shit right out of the gate. Had that huge major debut in the main event of St. Valentine's Day Massacre. They were jealous. It was professional jealousy. So no one was talking to him. Now, at least none of the top guys were at that point. He was riding with Public Enemy, and he became friends with Billy Gunn, but that was about it. So at that point, too, he was very inexperienced. He had just been in the business for 3 years. That's how long he had been wrestling for when he debuted in WWE in 99. That is crazy. And Taker, and I've heard this story a million times, whether it be from Big Show himself elsewhere or maybe from the Taker podcast a few months ago. But Taker was very hard on Big Show about everything. He grilled him on everything because he was a fellow big guy. And yeah, they had big guys at that point. Like Mark Henry was kind of going in and out. They had Kane. But Big Show was a lot less experienced than all of those guys. So Taker was really, really hard on him because he saw a lot in him. So he told him to work like a giant, work like a giant, work like a giant. And Big Show was like, what the fuck does that even mean? That's so vague. Everyone's telling me to work like a giant, and Pat Patterson telling me this, and Vince telling me that, and this guy's saying, don't believe what that guy's saying, listen to me. He was pissed. He just wanted to have fun. He would be sitting in his rental car, driving from one show to the next. Why don't I just drive this thing off the goddamn bridge? Because right now I'm not having fun. I want to have fun like Taker is. I want to have fun like Stone Cold is, And big guys have it hard and never really thought about this. And Taker talked about it in his podcast a few months ago with Austin, but Big Show reiterates it here, where the big guys have a tough time because they can do the stuff that everyone else is doing. Maybe not like a fucking, I don't know, like the 205 Live guys, for example, but they could do some pretty cool stuff like a sunset flip and whatever, a lot more than you would think, but they can't do it in their matches. They're very limited. And yeah, there's a limited aspect of the WWE style as it is, but big guys especially so, because they have to do what's right for their character, for the show, for the match. They can't be going out there and lighting the world on fire with all these cool moves. I guess they can once in a while to save it for when it means something, but they can't do it constantly just because it kind of takes away from their character and doesn't get them over as a dominant monster heel or their opponent over as a plucky underdog babyface. You know what I'm saying? So it was always really hard for him to listen to that mantra that less was more, but it ended up working because he's had such longevity out of it, And yeah, he was very limited, but it was part of being an attraction. So he said the whole, work like a giant, blah, 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 didn't click for him until one night in England when he was working with Stone Cold Steve Austin. Austin nailed him right in the fucking jaw, and he got pissed. And he's like, yeah, fire up, big man, fire up. And Big Show really let him have it. And that's when, it really, flipped on a switch in his head. Holy shit, I can be this dominant monster that everyone really wants me to be. This is how I do it. I'm thinking way too much with my brain, if that makes sense. I just got to turn off my brain and just go out there and do it. And it worked. He gave Braun Strowman, he said, the same advice after a match that he had with Sami Zayn years ago, probably back in, 2016, 2017, when Braun first showed up in WWE and he had that mini feud with Sami in the final few months of 2016, early on in 2017. He was watching one of their matches, and he saw that Braun, he took Sami's offense or something, and Big Show's like, don't do that. And Braun's like, well, I got to give him his time too. And he's like, no, you don't. You don't, though. He will have his day. His day is not today. Today is your day. If you want to maintain longevity here and you don't want to be booked into an oblivion, you gotta not no-sell, but you have to be on the offensive. Because if he's constantly going 50-50 with these other guys that are much smaller than him, then it doesn't work. So I completely understand where he's coming from when he said that. He talked about how, going back to the Attitude Era and his initial rise and whatnot, he had knee surgery back in 2000, and he was booked for a match with Taker right afterward. So at this point, they didn't know anything about, post-surgery rehabbing and stuff like that, because the knee was still very, very weak, and he didn't know about losing ring shape because he wasn't in the ring, so he was super out of shape when he came back soon after. Because he got back in the ring like almost immediately after the knee surgery. I mean, that's on him, but that's also on WWE. Why the fuck would you rush this guy back if he just had surgery? And again, this might have been at a time where they didn't really know the importance of rehabbing the injury and getting it back to 100%. Because, again, he was booked for a match with Taker. He went out there, had the match with Taker, and it fucking sucked. He blew spots. He blew himself up. It was just a disaster, and Taker was pissed. He was super, super pissed. So as a result of that, I mean, I'm sure that wasn't the sole factor, but he had to get his knee right and take some time off, and he just had to improve. He just was not good at that point. He was really, really green, and Taker was super pissed. So that's what led to his transition into OVW, WWE's developmental territory at that point. And they kind of painted it in a way in the Ruthless Aggression documentary that it said on the timestamp that it was 2000. I mean, that makes sense, but I thought it was in 2002. But maybe not, because Big Show was around in 2002. So it must have been in 2000. That must have made that would make sense. But they kind of painted it in a way in that Ruthless Aggression documentary, at least the first episode, that OVW came around after the Attitude Era because they needed new stars, which is inaccurate. It had been around well before that, at least dating back to 2000. I would have to check up on initially when it was launched. But he joined in 2000, and the first clip that you see of the first person that you see him working with there when he showed up and the crowd's going crazy, commentary's going crazy, because it's the fucking Big Show, He's working with none other than the Leviathan, better known as Dave Bautista. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool to see them working together. And then they had like a world championship match on pay-per-view 10 years later. I think that's pretty cool. Anyway, so he had heat at that point, even before he went to OVW, for not being able to keep up with all the top stars. He had no psychology in his in-ring work, so he had a lot of heat from people at that time, which is another factor which contributed to him being moved down to OVW for a time. And he called it a very humbling experience. He would show up in his monster truck, whatever it was, and it would be worth more than the entire OVW promotion, but he was being asked to set up the ring, do all this other stuff, because he was a part of the developmental territory at this point. Yeah, he was a bigger star because he had a bigger rise in WWE, but he was a part of OVW. He had it no better than anyone else. He was treated like anyone else in that promotion, which I thought was great. So anyway, he talked about his relationship from there with Vince McMahon early on in his career. He called it spotty. He said it was very spotty. He said that Vince liked Big Show, but he was kind of tough on him. He said that relationship did not improve until John Laurinaitis came in to work in the WWE offices, and JR was in that position before him, and JR was very tough on Big Show because he constantly told him to lose weight, and Big Show always took that the wrong way. Jim Ross saw it in a way where he wasn't making fun of him or he wasn't hard. I mean, he was hard on him, but not in the way that you would think. He was saying that because he wants him to be healthy. He wants him to have a very long, healthy career. Because, he's speaking from experience here. He knew Andre and how he died at 46 because the guy wasn't in shape. He didn't take care of himself. He didn't want to take care of himself. He didn't want to have that same thing happen to Big Show. So Jim Ross's advice, he didn't really understand at the time. He thought he was just being a dick. But he gets in retrospect that he was only really looking out for him, which is cool. He talks about the various gimmicks he had at that time, from the Showster stuff to all the, the heel and face turns. They get to that in a minute. But he talks about being a goofy character and a monster heel, all this other stuff. Stone Cold praises it. He says that all the characters that he used to do, all the impersonations, the comedy, really helped with his longevity. And he said that his mindset when he signed with them, that he was willing to do whatever they asked of him. And I've seen a lot of other people say that same thing. I saw another interview recently. God, I don't remember who it was with, though. I feel like I saw it on YouTube or something. I don't remember. It's going to bother me now. But someone else said the exact same thing recently, where You sign your name on the dotted line, and when you do that, I mean, I don't care where I am on the card or what I'm doing, blah, blah, blah. They have the ability to do whatever they want with me. They can do whatever they want because it's their company. They brought me in, and now it's my duty to play whatever role they have for me to the best of my ability. And he did that every single time, whether he was a goofy character, a hated heel, he always knocked it out of the park 9 times out of 10. 99 times out of 100 did Big Show knock it out of the park. He said that, he joked about having more heel turns than NASCAR. And they didn't really talk about the Floyd Mayweather feud from WrestleMania 24. He mentioned it briefly, Stone Cold did. But then, it would have been cool to hear him talk about that, because I thought that was huge for business. That was when Big Show, he took time off and right after he dropped the ECW title in 06. He was gone for all of 07 and came back in 08. He didn't talk about that at all, that absence from the company. I think he talked about it in his documentary that, went out years ago. I remember watching it on the network like 6 years ago when the network first launched. And he talked about that he was burned out and stuff like that. He didn't really talk about that here, but he did talk about how the feud with Shaq, the match with Shaq, never really came to fruition. Didn't really give much of a clear, concise answer, because there were a lot of rumors years ago after they have been planning, WWE has, for doing that Shaq Big Show match as far back as like 2009, when Shaq was on Raw and had that face-off with Big Show. And I don't think we saw Shaq again in WWE until WrestleMania 32, when he and Big Show had that face-off in the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal. And I think there were talks of having the match be done at WrestleMania 33 in Orlando, because I don't know if he lives in Orlando now, but he was a part of the Orlando Magic? Is that what it is? I don't know. I'm not a big basketball guy, but he played in Orlando for a very long time, so it would have made sense, And I think it was originally being talked about at a certain point. I think maybe in 2012 when they were in Miami, because he might be from Miami if I'm not mistaken. Shaq, that is. But he was from the Florida area. He played in Florida. It would have made sense at WrestleMania. What was it? WrestleMania in 2012. What was it? 28, excuse me. In 28, they tried it again at 33 in 2017. It again did not happen. And he chalked it up to Shaq always being busy and they never really had enough time to put the thing together. And he would have preferred it had it happen, and Shaq still wants it to happen because he saw Shaq recently somewhere. And this was shot recently too, because he talked about Kobe's death. So this must have been filmed like at least earlier this month, if not late last month. So it's not from like months ago. He would prefer that match to be, if it could still happen, to be a tag team match. Because one-on-one, he would make it work stylistically. He would sell for, make it work, whatever. It would probably be a shit show, no pun intended. It would probably work better as a tag team match. More of an attraction, have people in there selling for him. It would work better that way, he believes. He talks about how much he loves Kurt Angle, how much he loved working with him back in 2000, 01, 02, 03, whatever. Called him amazing in the ring, one of the best of all time, very nice guy. Stone Cold reveals that he actually blew up Kurt Angle once, and no one can ever blow up Kurt Angle, but Steve Austin did in Fresno at one point, maybe in 2000, 01, whenever Angle first showed up in the company. Big Show says that he loved working with Brock Lesnar as well, back in 02, 03. They recall breaking the ring, back on that episode of SmackDown in 2003, I think it was. And he was against the idea of doing it again, because everyone thought it was real the first time, and they really suspended people's disbelief with that first spot. To do it again, it's like, you did it once, now they reinforced the rings. I know it's been 7-8 years, but he wasn't really for the idea of doing it again. And then they did it a third time. They did it a second time with Mark Henry at the Vengeance 2011 pay-per-view. I remember that because I watched it, and I was like, wow, they did it again. They did it right after that, not right after, but like 6-7 years later in 2017 on an episode of Raw with Big Show and Braun in the main event. They had actually really good chemistry, a lot better chemistry than I was expecting. And he was against doing it then too. He said his favorite version of his character after being asked by Stone Cold was from like 2011 to 2014, which is very interesting because he had been in with the company since 1999. But his favorite run was from 2011 to 2014. 2011 was when he won the World Heavyweight Championship, got brought back later on that year, did this stuff with Mark Henry in the Hall of Pain. 2012, he turned heel, became World Heavyweight Champion. I think that is the best Big Show I've ever seen. That was the closest I ever came to being like a major Big Show mark. I thought they booked him great. The matches with Sheamus were great. The matches with Del Rio were very, very good. He said 2013, 2014. I don't really remember him doing much at that point. He worked a lot with The Shield. He worked with Mark Henry again. I don't really remember what else he did in 2013, 2014. 2014, he was really just a stepping stone. He was a part of that first ever Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal. But he said he loved that run. Before he started getting hurt so consistently, he loved being in the prime of his career, later on in his career, from 2011 to 2014. Said he also loved working with John Cena. Austin praises his feats of strength and how crazy strong he is. Big Show clarifies and said Brock Lesnar was the most explosive strength he's ever been in the ring with. Mark Henry is one of the most physically strong men he's ever been in the ring with, whereas John Cena is one of the most functionally strong men he's ever been in the ring with, like a forklift. He said that John Cena is essentially like a forklift, where he can pick up the Big Show without, popping or, whatever, pulling a muscle in his back or legs or whatever. It's crazy, the stuff that Cena can do strength-wise. And you can chalk that up to whatever it might be, roids, whatever. People have their theories. But when it comes to stuff like this, though, like with the Big Show, and then it's crazy. It's impressive, whatever way you want to paint it. It's impressive nonetheless. He talks about Mark Henry a little more. Says that Mark Henry always makes him smile. He's never been beaten in arm wrestling, he said. And they talk about some story that he had when he was in a smart car with Mark Henry years ago. He also talks a lot about working with the Special Olympic athletes in recent years, which he does a lot of. He's been doing that for quite some time now. He's like probably the biggest ambassador for the WWE partnership with the Special Olympics. No pun intended with the whole, biggest ambassador. But he does a lot with that stuff, which is really, really cool. He goes into more depth about that. He talks about how he's still having fun in wrestling, acting, whatever. Can't go 5 nights a week anymore, but, he still enjoys coming back and doing a run here and there. He said that he had the greatest time working on a Europe tour. I don't know when this would have been, a couple years ago maybe. He worked a Europe tour, and the entire time he had matches with Primo and Epico in a 2-on-1 handicap match every show. And he said he loved it. He praised them up the wazoo. He said they were awesome. He said the best opponent that he ever got to work with in the ring was John Cena, because they always kind of allowed each other to be each other. Big Show got to be that dominant monster heel, and John Cena was just John Cena, The toughest opponent he ever worked was Sheamus. He always got bruised whenever they had their matches together in 2012. He said that he got very, very intense, Sheamus did, early on in his career. And he's older now, he's cooled off a little bit, but he was very intense early on, to the point where he would do this spot in these matches they would work, where he almost blew out Big Show's knee. And he's like, dude, you got to stop doing that. You're going to fucking handicap me here. Like, stop doing it. Kane said, I think in his interview a couple months ago, that Big Show is the best big man in the business. Big Show turns that around and says Kane is the best big man of all time. And he gets emotional talking about it, how Kane really thinks that highly of him, and they're really close, so I thought that was nice of him to say that and get emotional while talking about it. He mentions how Vince's advice to him at one point, I don't know if this was from like early on in his career or in recent years, I don't know. But Vince's biggest piece of advice to Big Show was to always treat every day like it's your first day at work. Because, it's very tough to be on all the travel, to do all the travel, the planes, the buses, the cars, everything else. It can be very uncomfortable. And it's very easy to get upset. But you have to stay professional. You got to have a positive mindset. He had, a tough time with that at various points in his career, Big Show did. But he listened to that advice, and it stuck with him to this day. He also talks a lot about his new Netflix show, The Big Show Show. Again, I don't know when it's coming out. Maybe later on this year, if I'm not mistaken. I think I'm going to check it out. I'm looking forward to it. He said that he's digging being an actor. He loves his co-stars on the show. He loves the people that he's been acting and working with on the show. He said that he sat through an Ariana Grande concert recently with, I think, his daughter or something like that. Maybe it was a part of the show, but he mentioned that, and Steve Austin said that he loves her music. So, breaking news, Steve Austin is an Ariana Grande fan. I don't know if that'll be the headline of this video, but it might as well be. I thought that was funny. He said the advice that he would bestow upon the people of today in WWE is to not be content. He said there's a lot of people that work there now that are just happy to be there, and they're not motivated enough to speak up, step on people's toes, and don't be a bully or a dick or an asshole or whatever, but you got to stand up for what you believe in. And again, when it comes to that type of advice, because Austin has said the exact same thing on the show before. The issue is that it's tough to do that without the risk of getting punished. So you have to play it safe, and Big Show's there a lot more often than Steve Austin is. And Big Show's in a position now where he can speak up. If he thinks something is dumb, he will say as such, because he doesn't give a fuck. But other people on the roster do not have that same luxury. So I thought his advice was good, and he's right. But at the same time, though, people like Stone Cold saying that exact same thing, when it comes to like, oh, people got to step up and, whatever, and speak up, and if say this is bullshit, call it bullshit, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't exactly work like that anymore. And again, I don't work there, so I don't know, but like, a lot of people I feel have done that, and they've paid the price for it as a result. So you got to, obviously keep it in check and be careful with what you say and how you say it, because if you get heat backstage, you might be all but done in WWE at that point. To close it out here, he said that he's always liked Drew McIntyre, can empathize with his ups and downs. Very happy to see him succeed right now, see him doing well. Also a big fan of Big E, and he said that he wants to see him on his own at some point too, as a serious big man and not just a goofy third member of New Day. And to close it out, Big Show jokes about having Stone Cold come on the show at some point, the Big Show show, which he has had wrestlers on already. I guess they did an episode where Big Show takes his on-screen wife to a wrestling cruise for their anniversary, because of course he would. And I don't think Big Show is himself in the show. He might be. I don't remember. I don't know. I think he might be the Big Show, but like a fictionalized version of himself, because it's not his real family, obviously. But anyway, so they did the wrestling cruise thing, and they had Mark Henry on there, Mick Foley, Rikishi guest starred. He said Rikishi was hilarious, Mark Henry super funny, Mick Foley knocked it out of the park. So I'm looking forward to that episode whenever it airs on Netflix. Again, hopefully sooner rather than later, but I forgot when they said the show is premiering on Netflix, whatever point, probably later on this year if I would have to take a guess. And that was it. That was it for the Broken Skull Sessions episode the Big Show episode of Broken Skull Sessions with Stone Cold Steve Austin. I thought this was great. Clocks in again at around an hour and 24 minutes. I thought it would be like, not that I was dreading it, but like I'm not the biggest Big Show guy. I was looking forward more to the Undertaker interview and the Goldberg one and even the Kane one. But I thought this was great. I think it didn't help that we've heard other interviews like this with Big Show before with Steve Austin himself on this fucking network previously. Not in recent years, but definitely 4 or 5 years ago. I'm almost convinced they had an interview here on the network, on the WWE Network. I didn't review it, but I feel like they probably talked about a lot of the same things. It wasn't as long as this one, I can guarantee you of that. And Big Show's done so much in his career that it's cool to hear him talk about this and that, breaking in, getting heat, succeeding, advice that he has, stuff like that. So I enjoyed it nonetheless. Definitely check it out right now on the WWE Network. Broken Skull Sessions with Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Big Show. Be sure to like this video, drop a comment, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more daily content. Thank you guys, as always, for checking on the videos. Very much appreciate it. We will be back tomorrow right here on Network and Chill to break down the 3rd episode of WWE Ruthless Aggression. I don't know what it's on. It might be on Brock Lesnar. I forgot what the episode's about, but I'm looking forward to that. It goes up, I think, first thing Monday morning, which is why I'll probably watch it and then review it right here for the channel soon after. So stay tuned for that. Have a great rest of your week, and I got to go get this video uploaded so I can go watch the XFL game on FS1 the Defenders are playing today. So I'm looking forward to that. I mean, obviously, by the time this goes up, it'll be well after the game has already started, but keep in mind that's what I'll be doing with my Sunday evening tonight. But nonetheless, guys, have a great one. I'm Graham G. Matthews, and I'll catch your ass down the road.